Hey, I want to thank everybody for joining us today. We are talking to a really good friend of mine who is an adventure filmmaker. He's my partner in crime. We've done some adventures before in the past and looking forward to doing some great stuff in the future. He is the adventure filmmaker over the Timber Cross. That's his company, and I'm really excited to have him on today. What's going on, brother?
Hey, happy to be here, man. Just hanging out. A beautiful spring day. The snow, it's finally melting down here.
Yeah, so, I actually was able to get to my sled dog team without using my snowmobile, using my truck today. It was a little sketchy in a couple places, but we're making that very muddy transition from snow to mud to ground. So man, you've had an insanely busy year. I think just this year you've been to Central America, you've been to the Arctic, you just got back from Miami. Is there anywhere you haven't been?
Man, I haven't been out to the West Coast for a while.
Okay,
Most of it's been East Coast, but I guess Alaska last year. I guess technically
that's West Coast.
Technically, that's West Coast. So yeah, I can't even say that. So no, we've been lucky. It's been a good year, full of plenty of travel, and been fortunate to do some cool adventures here at home as well. A couple backcountry trips. One with you with the dog sled team, where we checked out that abandoned town and chilled out in that crazy cool cabin in the middle of nowhere, and then backcountry bush plane, went ice fishing for some massive muskies. That was a lot of fun. But Maine's my happy place, so no matter where I go, this is definitely home, and where there's plenty of adventure to be had.
When you've got a Maine hunting guide that says, hey, that abandoned town on the border of Canada, way up in the North Woods, well, I own a cabin near it, so you guys could mush out there and camp and explore the abandoned town and come back. Like, you can't say no to that. Like, you got to make that happen.
No, probably one of my favorite trips this year, to be honest with you.
Yeah,
that was great. That was real great.
It was a lot of fun. So, what do you got? What are you wrapping up right now before we talk about what you've got going on in the future?
Just wrapping up. Been doing a lot with lobster fishing, actually, this year. All through the winter, a good buddy of mine, he is a big YouTuber and TikToker showcasing lobster. He's a 5th generation lobster fisherman, and he's just educating people on all of these incredible catches. And a really good friend of mine. I've been helping him with his media for a while, and doing a bunch of stuff with that. But some small documentary work, finishing up that project that brought me down to Panama and brought me to Miami. Going to be trying to wrap that up soon, and then potentially a short trip to Africa coming up here soon to teach a film team down there to help equip their church to better tell the stories that they have. And then come June, July, going back to live with the polar bears for a few months. So excited about that as well. But at the same time, heart sick to be leaving home again for the second summer, leaving during the best weather. But to hang out with polar bears, it's pretty special.
I think, and for the people who don't know you, people may be listening that haven't, seen your work before. Really what sets you apart in my mind is, it can be summed up in one word, and that's passion. Like, you take on passion projects. Of course, you have to make a living. You have a family, you have some beautiful kids, beautiful wife. You got a pretty cool shepherd back there. And, so you've got bills to pay, but when there's something that really ignites your passion and ignites your sense of adventure, you jump right onto it. And I think that's really what sets you apart. You can feel that sense of passion in those passion works that you make. And that's why, what was it, 3 years ago when I was doing the Togo 261 dog sled expedition, I got a call coming in. Hold on a second. When I was doing the Togo 261 dog sled expedition, the idea, was presented of, doing a documentary about it. And I was like, main adventure outdoor filmmaker. There's like only one guy that, fits that bill. And you and I hadn't even met yet, but I'd seen your work, and your work had excited me. And I felt like this is the guy. It's got to be this guy. And thankfully, as important as money is to you, your passion is really important to you. And you heard my sales pitch and hopped right on.
Man, yeah, you said it. The passion is such an important factor for me. Obviously providing for the family, like you said, is huge. But, when I'm looking at any project, it's got to check a few boxes, and depending on where that lies, some of them, it could be really something that I don't love, but I can still bring that creative, artistic side if it's going to feed the family. But if you can get me into the middle of a really good adventure around some great people to tell an amazing story, that's a huge, huge check mark. And, that's what it was with you as well. When you reached out, I just dipped my toe into dog sledding. Last minute, a friend of mine reached out and was like, "Hey, you're going to come up to the, Fort Kent and, see the Can-Am." And I was like, I have no idea what that is. I've lived in Maine for years and years and had no clue. And he told me what it was. And I think on like 4 hours notice, I dropped everything. I'm like, honey, I'm going up. There's a cabin up in the Allagash, and I'm going to go film this dog sled race. Knew nobody that was involved, and was just trekking around the woods, just trying to get glimpses of this. And that had sparked my interest that this sport was still alive in Maine. And again, living here and trying to do as much as I could in Maine, I still hadn't heard a lot about it. So then when you reached out, it was like, nah, this is a unique opportunity to meet a like-minded individual with a sense of adventure, to be able to teach me something that I know nothing about in the dog sled community, and to be able to share it with people. And I mean, I think it also helped your case for me to want to go so hard, because I'd been in quarantine for like weeks at this stage. And then I just got done with this big competition, being stuck inside for, I think, a total of like 5 weeks. So I was itching to get out into the woods. And I'm really happy that it brought us together. And that's what these adventures do. When you're able to chase your passion, and it helps the people that you actually want to help and tell the stories you want to tell, it helps you not burn out. I didn't start filmmaking to become wealthy or well-known. I want to show my family that you can chase your passions, and I wanted to encourage people to get out and to explore it, to look past what they're used to, not to be afraid to be uncomfortable, and to get into the wilderness to find themselves, and also to get out into their community and truly embrace what that sense of community can and should be, besides just being stuck on your phone and living vicariously through everyone else. And for me, that's just been massively important. And that's kind of what the polar bears were last year. I had no inclination, no plans. Obviously, I've always loved polar bear. They're an amazing creature, but had no plans to go up and to see them, and to see them in the way that I've been able to. But I got a phone call, and someone's like, "Hey, got a kind of a unique opportunity." This guy's an old Hollywood DP. I mean, he's done it all. He's used to work on music videos for Michael Jackson and P. Diddy and all the high-end commercial work. And, through the Lord, we're blessed to be brothers. And he's like, "Look, I've got somebody reaching out, and they're looking for somebody that can run a camera and can run a gun that might potentially be open to this interesting opportunity to actually become a polar bear guard and to guide this Netflix crew to a spot that most people have never heard of and will never step foot on." And the pay wasn't great. The pay was awful. But the experience was just absolutely life-changing. And part of that exchange was, I could go out and I could film my own stuff at the same time.
So I'm looking forward to diving in with you on specifically your polar bear stuff. First, like, what do you think it is? Like, a lot of this newer generation that's coming up behind you and I, like you said, they live a lot through their phone, and they just experience the world through their phone or on the internet rather than actually going out and living it. And more guys like you and I, and we know a lot of guys like us, you work with them, you make films about them. We can't just stay home. We can't, like, when there's an adventure to be had, when there's an expedition to be done, when there's some new way to push ourselves, like, we have to do it. And, even sometimes that can be a frustration to our families, right? And our wives, like, what the heck are you doing now? You're doing what? Why are you doing this? But there's this drive, like, what do you think that is? And where do you think that comes from in your mind?
Well, I think it's a combination of things. I think the big thing nowadays with a lot of the generation that's coming up is they've been so groomed to be comfortable and just are used to those creature comforts. And if you're uncomfortable, it's how do I immediately get comfortable? Like they're not as apt to challenge themselves physically and mentally. And I think you and I both recognize the value in embracing the suck and truly understanding who you are in those situations. And the other side of it is a lot of people didn't have anyone to help guide them into it. So they have a lack of confidence to even explore those situations. I feel like they're worried about being judged for doing it wrong. But part of adventure is it's going to get messy. It's going to be uncomfortable. It's not going to be perfect. And how do you adapt and how do you overcome it? And that teaches you so much about who you are. And I think with guys like you and I am constantly trying to test my own limits and my boundaries of who I am. And I want to find that breaking point.
Yeah,
as dumb as that may sound, like you've learned so much about who you are, and when you know where that line is, or how massively difficult or uncomfortable certain situations are, and you overcome it. When you enter other situations in life that suck, you can just kind of shrug it off. You reach into that cookie jar of your accomplishments and go, I've made it through so much more than this.
Yeah,
I know I can overcome that.
I think it's the writer of Hebrews in the Bible, whoever that is. Some say it was Apollos, some say it was Paul, but I think it was the writer of Hebrews that said, no trial, no tribulation seems pleasant in the moment. And but it's only in that rear view when you look back that you say, wow, that was so worth it, and I'm so glad that I went through that. I can't tell you how many times, and it happens often, especially training for long distance sled dogs. When you've slept 4 hours in the last 3 days, and that's no exaggeration. When you've slept 4 hours in the last 3 days and you're out on the trail, it's like, why am I doing this? What is possessing me to do this? And it never and there are times like, man, why? This is crazy. This is stupid. I'd rather be in my bed. I'd rather be doing this or that. And then you get on the other side of it, and you see the rewards that come from it. And they're not always tangible rewards, right? They're not always financial rewards. They're not always, and we come out of them with scars. Sometimes we come out of them with injuries sometimes, but like the reward is in the depth that it brings to our character, and the depth that it brings to our soul, and the communion that it gives us with the Creator. I'm speaking for myself, but just having that intimacy with the Creator through creation is a big part of it for me.
Yeah, I think you touched on a lot of really, really important things. Like it is, embracing the joy and the tribulation and the lessons that can be learned. And, some of the things that you get on the backside, like you said, it's not monetary. If you chase these things for monetary reasons, you're going to be absolutely miserable, but the depth of your character and the ability, especially, with what we're talking about with you mushing, the ability to have that incredible level of discipline, because it's your character of what you're doing when no one is watching. And it's, it shows when you put in the time in the races, or when you're putting in the longer treks. You can't fake that kind of thing. You know what I mean? And it's easy to put on a fake persona, but you get out into these adventures, you get out into this real world. When it hits the fan, you're going to see your character. I don't know who said it, but it's, you truly can tell what flavor of tea it is once it's sitting in hot water. And there's that confidence that you can pull from all these situations of going through the tribulation. And then I'm a weird dude, and I love telling stories, and I've had a theory for a very, very, very long time. And some of the worst times make the absolute best stories. So when stuff starts blowing up all around me, sometimes back in the day, I'm literally the guy that's laughing, because I'm thinking ahead. I'm like, man, this sucks. This is awesome. This is great.
Last winter in the Willow 300, I was out for 3 days, and in the middle of night 2, and I can't remember what the temperatures were. It was cold in Alaska, in the middle of a 300-mile race, and going over an ice bridge of a stream that had broken, from the teams that had gone on before, and completely becoming submerged in the water and coming out. You know what the first thought of my mind was? This is going to make a great story for my grandkids someday.
That's the truth,
So
man.
I'm right there with you. I think in our hearts, in a lot of ways, we're storytellers too, right?
Yep. And again, touching on the whole thing of telling your kids, your grandkids, for me, my kids are still pretty young. And, I took on this career, not in a great financial situation, you know what I mean? But I really want to see them. I want them to see tangibly that if you chase your passions and the gifts that the Lord has given you, that, there's great reward in that. And it's not always monetary, but, we do have a lot of freedom, and it does take me a lot of incredible places, and we can help a lot of people. I was doing construction before this. I can do sales all day long. Yep. And that's part of this job here is, to be able to make a living. But as far as the construction side of it, that's, I can build stuff, but it's not who I am. It's not my passion. It's not living to the potential that the Lord has created me to do. And this is a season, maybe 10 years from now, 5 years from now, 5 minutes from now, the Lord will say, hey, Jeremy, put the camera down. And I'll put the camera down.
Yeah.
But right now, I'm going to live and share as many great stories as I can. But as you said before, like that adventure side, that's always been something that's been infused in me from a very young age, that unless the Lord takes it away, it's going to keep happening. And I might as well carry it a couple extra pounds with me and share the adventure.
So speaking of sharing the adventure, you've been doing some work with polar bears. I think you've been up twice to the Hudson Bay area working with polar bears. And you're going back up this summer, is that right?
Yeah,
likely.
Yep, most likely. If everything goes as planned, we're going to have a unique opportunity. So I'm one of a handful of certified polar bear guards in this region through Nunavut. Like, it's not an easy thing to achieve. So it's pretty cool to have that random certification. Pretty much useless anywhere else in the world to say, hey, I'm a polar bear guard.
Well, lots of people would like to have that, but they would have none of it.
Oh, dad jokes for days.
Dad jokes. Okay, so you're up in Nunavut. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
So we're up in that region, and it's cool. So last year, I was able to spend a decent amount of time out there alone, which is cool. We're able to set up this floating barge at first, the 10 by 37. It's like a bobber. I mean, it was just getting beat up in the storms, and we're literally in the Hudson Bay in this region where We're outside of these river estuaries, so at low tide, there's only a few feet of water under the barge. And then at high tide, you've got like 15 to 16 feet. And at high tide, you'd have thousands of beluga whale for hours just swimming, swimming all around the barge. And then you'd also have bear swimming all around in that low tide. You'd have bear like walking by your barge. And during the night, the storms would hit, and we had, I think about, I don't know how many, 70 to 90 cinder blocks in the bottom. And we'd have to literally jump in the hatch below and be shifting and moving everything around because this floating vessel was not equipped for that. But we got commissioned to guide a Netflix team to get some incredible shots that I can't fully talk about what we got without breaking NDA. But, we're out there for a few weeks, and then they moved on, and then I was able to take the barge to a different location and then guide a separate Netflix team for the same series onto this incredible island. And this island just blooms with purple flowers and polar bears, and you've got white sand beaches and black sand beaches, and, things that growing up and even until just a few years ago, footage I've never seen in my entire life, because the narrative of that we're always shown, it's just these polar bears on ice. And if it's recently in the last couple of years, it's polar bears on melting ice, because these poor bears are all dying and the ice is all gone and there's no way they can survive off the ice.
Let's dig into that. So as you know, wildlife biology is it's what I teach in school, and I studied conservation management in grad school. And what we know is that apex predators like the polar bear is a keystone species, and what that means is that it is an indices of the health of the ecology of the region. And since the 1970s, we've been told that the polar bear population is plummeting. They're on the brink of extinction. It's just getting worse and worse and worse. But unlike a lot of those doomsday scientists, you've actually been up there. So what are you seeing, and what's your takeaway from what you're seeing up there?
It's interesting because being in the town of Churchill, which was like 60, 70 miles away from where we were camping out remotely, you talk to a lot of the locals and they're seeing more bear than they've seen in years and years and years. I'm not saying that, everything is fine and everything is honky-dory, but when you've got a small group of people that have lived there for 40, 50, 60 years, even sometimes longer, and they're saying that they're seeing more polar bear than they've ever seen in their lifetime, well, I'm going to be more apt to take their word for it than certain scientists that are not studying it as in depth as they need to from a remote location.
But even the population scientists of the polar bear, they're actually affirming what you're saying, right? That the actual populations are actually, despite what we're hearing, actually going up, right?
Well, and part of it too, it's the agenda piece. Not to be a conspiracy theorist or anything, but as a filmmaker, it's hard to get things financed. Like we're talking about, the balance between passion projects and paying projects. If I've got a project in mind, I've got to find people to back it, or I have to self-fund it. And I've got all of this polar bear footage right now. I've got tons and tons and tons of footage, and I've got enough to make something pretty cool, but I can't pick up a necessary sponsor for that. But if I wanted to jump into the climate change initiative, I wouldn't have an issue. If I wanted to jump aboard and use these adorable bears as the mascot for climate change and talk about how our environment is destroying them, no, there wouldn't be an issue. And that's really easy money to come across. And I've actually even had people on Instagram reach out to me. They're like, hey, we want to help support these polar bears. Can we provide you with funds to help share the climate change initiative? Where my response is, I would love to work with you, and I'd be happy to receive some funding to educate people and showcase what I'm actually seeing,
right,
and what I'm actually hearing.
Right.
I'm not a scientist, so I'm not going to make super bold claims, but I'm getting messages from people that have been studying them for years, and they're zoologists. And, I've got this one shot of a mom and cub, and they're snuggled up on a rock, and it's adorable. They look like a yin yang. And from above, they're just like right into each other. They're like both hanging off the rock because they're so big, and they're surrounded by water. There's no ice in sight because the subarctic does not have ice in the summertime. But these bears choose to come off the ice for hundreds of years in this location, because where the river estuaries flow in Hudson Bay, that's the first place it freezes. And that's one of the last places it thaws. So they come off the ice there, so they have the most hunting ground. And then they go on the ice there because that's the soonest they can get hunting ground. And then they distribute along that line. Yeah. They've been doing this for ages. Long before we knew they were doing it.
Just to kind of go along with what you're saying, and I think you'd agree, because you and I have had a lot of conversations about this. I think we both agree that A, is the climate changing? Yes. B, is it warming? Probably. C, are humans to blame? Maybe. D, can the humans fix it? I have a big question mark on that one. But when this was 15 years ago, bro, when I was working on graduate studies, I wanted to study the Northeast coyote hybridization with the Eastern timber wolf. And people up here, people everywhere really in Western culture hate canids, they hate wolves, they hate coyotes, they just want to see them gone. And so I kept being told, you're not going to get any funding for studying coyotes. People just want them exterminated. They said, but if you can dress whatever you want to study in, global warming is what they called it at the time, global warming garb, then you can get funding. And everyone was blaming the coyotes for the white-tailed deer crashing. So what I ended up doing was white-tailed deer winter survivability. And because then we're talking about global warming, poof, there's the money for the study. And and so what's funny is, after 2 years of studying this, and we looked at white-tailed deer wintering areas versus where the white-tailed deer are actually migrating to, and they actually did, small migrations to wintering areas. But what we discovered was where they were migrating to wasn't these deer winter yards that scientists wanted to say that they needed, to survive the winter. They're actually passing right through them and going to towns like Allagash, towns like Millinocket here in Maine, where humans feed them throughout the winter, because they've only been here for like 100 years and they're not physiologically adapted to the cold here. So when we have extreme winters in Maine, which we do about every 10 years, their population plummets, and they're, really dependent on humans feeding them. But I said all that to say this, the data that we were receiving wasn't what the timber and those sponsoring us wanted it to be. They wanted it to be, oh, look, we've set aside this habitat for the deer, and here the deer are using it. And the science wasn't showing that. What the science was showing was they weren't using it at all. They were passing right through it to go where humans were giving, to communities where humans were feeding them to survive the winter. That's what they needed in this region. And that creates a whole, invasive species. Why are we managing for a species that wasn't here 100 years ago? Because it's a desirable game species, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But, I said all of that to say, if you wonder why we're being flooded with so much climate change science, it's because that's where you're going to get the money. And and as a scientist, if you want your research funded, you've got to talk about global warming. And the last thing I'll say on this, and then I'll be curious to hear what you've got to say, is the new religion of the world. We're in a post-Christian era in the Western culture, and the new religion, because humans always have to have a religion. The new religion is science, right? And to people who don't study science, they're always like, science is the only objective truth. Science is the only unbiased truth. And what I tell my students all the time is, I'm like, because all of my students play sports here at the school, and I'm like, referees. Are referees biased or are referees unbiased? And oh man, they explode. Referees are so biased. The referees we had at that last game, and they were calling for the other team because they liked the other team, and they were calling against us more than they were calling against them. And I said, so referees are biased? And they said, yeah. And I said, but are they supposed to be biased? No, they're not supposed to be biased. And then I shift that over to science. Are scientists biased? No. Well, like referees, they're not supposed to be biased, but you've got two things working there. Everyone has to acknowledge that they come to every project with a degree of bias. And two, they've got to make all the people that funding their research happy with the results that they find. So there's some major bias in every field of science.
Yeah, and I mean, you had the human factor. None of us are perfect. Like you said, approaching any situation, we approach it with a level of bias and thought. And, especially when it comes to something like polar bears, it's similar to what you were saying is, there's all of these scientists saying one thing, and then we're viewing the animal behavior in the field in a different way. And when it comes to something like the polar bear, I'm not saying it can't be found, but you're not going to find the accurate information online that you're looking for. And it's so easy to be able to build, quote unquote credentials in these fields by repeating these biased research papers and biased funding. So if all the funding is using the polar bear as the mascot for global warming, now anytime you're looking up information about the polar bear, well, what are you going to keep finding? You're going to find it again and again and again and again and again. And you go, it's easy to be spoon-fed and go, well, if that's what I keep reading, that's what has to be the truth.
So tell us what we're going to keep hearing, but you got to use your David Attenborough voice when you tell us.
The polar bear is dying and no longer on the ice. It has to swim for 7,000 miles a day just to get 1 calorie of seal. But it's like, these polar bear are so resilient. And like the deer, like all wildlife, they find ways to adapt. And, like you said, these deer, what you found is they were going through the lands that scientists were saying that they needed. And polar bear is different. It's the summertime. That's the hard time for the bear. You've got the ice melting. Is it melting a little sooner? Probably. Is it thawing or is it freezing later? Sometimes, but not all the time. Even this fall, for example, we saw ice in the Hudson Bay sooner than they'd seen in a very long time. And there were bear out on the ice earlier than they have been in the past. But we're seeing these bear coming into these sections and adapting and hunting. And is it a practice that all of the bear are doing and all doing successfully? No. But I'm getting scientists and zoologists on my feed sending me messages being like, oh, these poor bears. And, they are in what's called, a walking hibernation, where they're trying to fatten up and they're just finding places, and there's little to no movement of that bear. They're saying that these bears find a place to lay down. They're probably not moving for weeks at a time. Where I'm like, okay, the bear actually move decent amount in the morning. They'll cool off in the water in the middle of the day, and then they usually take a long nap. And then sometimes they're moving on through the night, or they'll hang out in these regions for 2 or 3 days. But they're typically still looking for food the entire time. And one of the big things that's brought them to this area is the beluga whale, where these bears, just like when they're hunting for seal, they are incredibly patient. When the ice is there, the bear are going to sit by a seal hole, and they're just going to wait. They're just going to freaking wait. Seal comes up, they're going to try to get it. 1 out of 10 times, it's going to maybe be successful. They're not very proficient, but they're really good at keeping the fat. They use that same strategy in these tidal zones where they sit on top of a rock When the tide is low, they're going to come up. They're going to sit on these big rocks. They're going to wait, and they find the right ones. The water is going to come up where they're almost sitting in the water, and they're going to wait till the whales start swimming around. They dive down, and they catch whales. All the bears successful? No, just like with the seal. But when they are successful, there's a vast amount of fat. And then they're sharing with multiple bears. Where you can sit there and you see 5, 6 bears eating one carcass. And people are saying, well, it's not very common. It's super uncommon. But when I'm seeing it again and again and again in a short period of time that I've been out there, and they're like, well, that's just that one particular area and you're never going to see it anywhere else. And then I go 90 miles the opposite direction in the coast where it isn't being documented or talked about at all. And now I'm out on the tundra in a 4-wheel drive, and I wake up after sleeping out on the tundra filming the Northern Lights. And now I see a polar bear dragging a baby beluga whale up on the sand beach. But they never do it.
Yeah.
And then I find polar bear eating seals, which there's no way for them to catch seals in the summertime. And then I see them eating Canadian geese. Oh, they don't do that. And I'm like, well, I've seen it. I've got footage of it.
Yeah.
And again, just in a short period of time that I've done it, and maybe I'm just super blessed to have seen some of the most rare polar bear moments of all time. But if I had to guess, that's not the case.
Yeah. And let's just, can we just pause for a second and just talk about how, as the largest land predator in the world, just how freaking awesome these guys are. I mean, I don't know if you've ever tried to pull another human out of the water, like onto a boat, but do you think about the strength that it takes for these guys to not only kill something in the water, but then to pull something as big as a beluga whale or as big as some of the seals that they're killing, to pull it up onto the ice, man. Just what amazing power these things have.
And it's crazy because they're smooth and they're graceful, and then they're super fast. Like when I'm camping out with them, and it's an interesting thing. They're like people. We're like all animals. They each have kind of a different mentality, a different personality. And I've been closer to these bear than I would have never imagined physically possible. Multiple times. And the amount of bear encounters that I've had, and again, it's seasonal type stuff. I know in different seasons their mentalities are going to be significantly different, but I also know that they're very opportunistic and they're very, 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 very persistent.
Yeah.
So once you get viewed as food, it is very hard to convince that polar bear that you are no longer food. Where this 3-legged polar bear, my favorite polar bear, Hercules, she lost her back leg as a cub, and everyone thought she had died. And they had recorded her as a cub on one of these backcountry missions, and no one had seen her for years, and everyone assumed she was dead. And she happened to stroll onto the island that I was camping at and hung out there for 8 days. And she was still there when I left, but it got to the point where that bear was just constantly stalking me, no matter where I was walking around on the island. She's missing her back leg, and so she'll get a good trot going, and then she drags her butt, and then she trots. But I mean, even missing a leg, that bear would move.
Yeah, and unfortunately, it's those animals that have handicaps that are going to be more prone to attack a human. Because
I wouldn't even say that in this situation, but it's any bear, any of these bear. Like if I didn't take extreme action, never hurting the bear, but setting hard, fast boundaries and never running, they would be incredibly persistent.
Yeah, my point is whether it's a wolf or a coyote or a tiger or a lion, humans make for easier targets than their usual prey. We don't run very fast. We don't have claws. We don't have big fangs. We're compared to the thing, and it really goes back to God, instilling, thank the Lord, he instilled in nature this natural desire to avoid humans. Like these predators, they don't want to be anywhere near us usually, except for when you start talking about these huge, like you're dealing with polar bears. They don't see anything as a
no,
right.
And that's the cool thing. It's like if you go to the town of Churchill, like if you Google it, you look at it, it's the unofficial polar bear capital of the world. And it's this unique and crazy area where there are bears that come in and out multiple times throughout the year, and they know what humans look like and everything like that. But you get further up the coast into these spots that you've got to get dropped by a helicopter, or you've got to take like a 7-hour boat ride. And to be like blunt, there's only maybe 2 vessels in that whole region that can even take you into the bay that far. So not many people are getting there. And these bears have never seen people before. And when they look at you, they're curious. They're just as curious about me as I am of them. And, they don't know how big they are, but they also know that they're not afraid of anything but themselves. Mm-hmm. And depending on the age of a bear, like if you see a big boy, just a fatty, these faces all scarred up, well, he's over 4 or 5 years old, and he's gotten into some really big fights. So now his mentality, his confidence is significantly different. When you run into like a 3.5-year-old bear that's not fighting for breeding rights yet, they're still in that wrestling, sparring phase with younger bear to size themselves up and to see where their strength is. So when they look at you, sometimes they're a lot more bold than these bigger bear. And, you've got to scare them off a few times, but then other times they've got their butt kicked every sparring session and their confidence isn't there. But then sometimes you get these big grumpy bear where, they're ripping the walls off my bear blind. And I'm yelling at them or, shooting the shotgun off, and they're like, all right, I'm going to stop, but I'm going to lay down 10 feet from you. And I'm just going to chill here until I'm ready to go.
Yeah.
And once they get up and start being curious again, you got to be right on it. And, there's a situation where I had 2 of these bear ripping into the blind at the same time. One's breaking down the back, one's ripping into the front. I'm up on the roof and I'm running out of ammo, scaring these things away because they smelled what I was cooking. They're like, oh man, like that noise is loud and it's scary, but it ain't hurting me. Mm-hmm. And then eventually you've got to, do something where it's more uncomfortable, where now the bear is like right up at your feet and it's like bear spray right up in the nose.
Yeah, it's
like spray, but it's like those boundaries. And for me, my main mission is like I never want to hurt one of those bear. I don't want to cause permanent damage. You know what I mean? I'm in their territory. If they attack me and drag me out to eat, well, that's my fault. I showed up in their territory. I'm hanging out of their house. You break into this house, and if you end up not coming back, that's your fault.
Yeah, and that what you just said is really important. Probably we can wind up with this thought and get your feedback on this. Is that there is this false dichotomy, this false notion that the far left, extreme atheists, far left people, they're the ones who care about the environment, and and the right, the far right Christians and the conservatives, they don't care anything about the environment. They don't care about nature. We don't have to buy into every narrative that we're being sold in order to care for creation. Mm-hmm. Creation care was humanity's first job. Like God told Adam, this is your job to care for where I've placed you. And, I think that's a false dichotomy. I think that we as Christians should care more about creation than we're children of the Creator. We have, this is our inheritance, and we need to care more about it than anybody, right?
Yeah, I would agree with that. And at the same time, understanding that all of this is temporary and part of God's plan and God's design. And to go into the climate change movement, the climate has been changing for a very long time. And I think a lot of the research that we're developing now is kind of catching up to some of that. But I mean, look back at Noah. I mean, as soon as that vapor canopy was changed and rain was introduced to the earth for the first time, that was the first truly significant change of climate. And the earth will never be the same after that. Our longevity has gone down drastically. But yeah, we are charged to be good stewards of this land. And I think as adventurers, we understand that, you know, a lot of these incredible places out in the wilderness, and it is a true glimpse of the beauty that God has provided. And I mean, I always feel that way. One of my favorite things, I think you would agree, is when you're out in the middle of nowhere, so far away that there is not even humoring an idea of light pollution. And you look up into the sky and you see the stars, the northern lights and the moon, and just what God has created. And you wake up that next day to that beautiful sunrise that's just for you. You're seeing all the animals and all the flora and fauna. I mean, it is truly something special, and something that we should be taking care of to pass through to different generations. But at the same time going, this is all temporary, and this isn't my home. As much as I love it, my home is with Jesus in eternity. And this is just a grain of sand on an endless beach in the light of eternity. And the beauty that is here is just a fraction of the beauty that's going to be up there with our Creator. But yeah, our first job, Adam, take care of this. And even after the fall, like, look, no, your job is still to take care of it, but you're going to sweat and you're going to bleed to do it.
And in our eternal home, in eternity, you know, as the bride of Christ, we rule and reign with him, but rule and reign over what, where, you know, even then, you know, stewardship is going to be huge, going to be our job. I want to apologize to you for, I am not a very important guy, but the moment we started this, my phone starts ringing, my messages blowing up, and you know, I'm new to this podcasting thing, so I want to apologize to you for everything blowing up. And I want to wrap up with asking you to tell everyone where they can follow you, where they can watch what you're doing, and check out what you've got going on, especially with the bears.
Yeah, so I do a lot on social media. You can check out the website, thetimbercross.com. And if you type in Jeremy Grant on any social media, that's where you're going to find the Instagram. That's going to be the main spot for most of that content. But I got a lot of cool stuff going on, and this season is going to be, it's going to be really interesting. And then I don't think we're talking about it yet, but Jonathan and I are definitely not done by any means on our adventures. But I would recommend you guys go check out the documentary that we did make together, True North, Legends of Dogs and Men. And you're going to see him mushing through the gorgeous backwoods of Maine to honor this legendary breed of dog.
Yeah, I'm really excited about what we've got planned. We're not quite ready to share it, but when we do, we're definitely going to have you back. Thank you for joining us. And I want to say to everybody, you know, click like on this, subscribe to this podcast, follow it, and make sure you give Jeremy Grant and the Timber Cross some love by going and checking him out as well. Thanks, Jeremy.
Hey, I appreciate your time, brother.
It was good to see you.